Our boy Pete's giving us a thumbs up.
He's giving us a thumbs up? Does that mean we're live?
Yeah.
All right, good enough.
He's the
Hopefully
director.
people can see us actually live right now. We'll pause just a couple more seconds of just let all of our bits get out into the interwebs before we talk about all the cool, important stuff. But yep, I see us on YouTube. Cool, welcome back to another Friday live Q&A here with the Edge team. And actually, we're 2 in a row here, Brett.
I'm pretty consistent.
Consistent, I know. I'm kind of in and out, unfortunately. But you've got myself, Paul Poy, CEO and co-founder, and
Brett Maverick Musser, head of business development and content here at Edge. So I kind of write things up and pretend like I know what I'm talking about.
If you want to check out a lot of Brett's work, edge.app/blog. That's going to get a lot of love.
And I can't take
great content.
I can't take all the credit for it. I wish I could, but I get a lot of help around the office, kind of explaining some of the technical details that are going on here and elsewhere in crypto land. And I'm kind of learning during the process of kind of trying to explain it to our user base.
If you haven't checked out the blog, I think there's a lot of great content on there. Definitely check it out. And actually, if you'd like us to write about any specific topics, just like this is a live Q&A, one of the questions would be what you want us to answer within the live Q&A. But if you have stuff that you actually want us to write about, why don't you go ahead and post it into the YouTube channel, let us know, and we'll kind of consider it and see whether or not Brett puts his head and mind into it and drafts up something pretty cool.
Also, another nugget, if you have questions right now, put them in the chat on YouTube. Do we also are we on Periscope on this?
Oh, no, we're YouTube. We decided
YouTube.
We'll
keep it on one channel.
Focus on YouTube, yep, exactly. So go ahead and push your questions there, and we'll try to get them answered through the course of this live Q&A for the next half hour. Cool, so we said we were going to be talking about, these are a lot of the questions that are coming around in the industry and also what has come to Edge, starting off with the big news about Venezuela.
Yeah, big story in Bloomberg today, and I think you have to take any news that comes out quickly because with a grain of salt.
Totally.
Right, but I think there is some merit to it. It makes sense. Like plausibly, it could be true.
Could be true, and you can actually ask the question of whether or not it would have been a generally good idea.
Mm-hmm. And so the story goes, Venezuela, the country, kind of, I guess, out on the edges of international relations. They're kind of considered a rogue nation. And I guess that definition is basically is kind of dependent on the United States and our opinion on other countries.
Yep.
Definitely not defending the Maduro regime, but it's a fact that they're under sanctions, financial sanctions, and that kind of makes it hard for them to transact internationally. And they're in a pretty bad financial situation, a lot of mismanagement. They have very low foreign balance reserves.
What was that foreign balance reserve? We were talking about right beforehand.
Yeah. So apparently $7 billion for a country.
For a whole country. There's people in this country, in the U.S., that are worth more than the entire
That's
country.
what their central bank has. That's it.
Correct. That's it. That's the reserve that they've gotten. There's many people in the country, in the world, that are worth more than that, like individual people. And definitely companies that are worth more than that.
Yep. So the point is they're in a pretty bad financial situation. They've been in a bad financial situation for a while. Now they have sanctions making it even worse. And one of the state-sponsored oil companies, I think PDVSA, which is, I think they have a monopoly on it. There are probably a few other things, but I wouldn't imagine there's a lot of competition in that country. They somehow, or it's reported that they have balances of Bitcoin and Ethereum. Right?
And Ethereum.
Yes.
Now that's interesting to me because I definitely hear of Bitcoin a lot in the kind of government central bank talk, but rarely do I hear of pretty much any other currency. And especially Ethereum, considering that although it is the second largest currency, it's been so lauded for many years as being like it's not a currency, it's what you pay to be able to create and execute these smart contracts.
Now we don't know if like they're trying to sell them or they can't because they probably don't want to be on an exchange. If you're someone how much do they have?
How does the government KYC?
We don't
Would
know.
that be interesting? Like, excuse me, we're the Venezuelan government.
Yeah.
Here's our passport with a selfie of it in front of the camera of our webcam.
That would be an interesting account.
That would be a hell of an account for them to apply for with like Kraken. If you work for any of the big exchanges, how would you open an account for the entire country of Venezuela?
We also don't know how they came to own those assets. If they do own them, did they confiscate them from people in their country that were mining?
Correct.
Using their energy because they're an energy company, or did they actually accept it for payment
That's the way the U.S. actually got most of its Bitcoin. While at the point that it had some, was it confiscated
from
from people that it deemed were doing illegal things.
drug dealers. Was it a drug heist, like the big one?
Well, the big one, Silk Road.
Yeah. Well, was
Obviously,
that
right?
yeah? Was that where they got most of their Bitcoin? That's what I'm saying.
I think that
they
was the
ended up-
largest sum that we have heard of in the history of acquisition by the U.S. was through Silk Road.
So it's actually a good business move by the U.S. government.
Except
right?
they
Did
sold
they
it.
make money on it?
Then they sold it right away at, I
Okay.
think, even a loss.
Well, what was their? They sold it. How did they sell it at a loss?
You could sell a loss
They didn't
because
buy
at the point you acquired
it.
it,
They just
if
took
you
it.
sold it at the point that you acquired it, then it would have been at a higher price.
So
So you acquire something. Sure, you didn't buy it, but you sell it at a lower price than when you acquired
that's
it.
That's the great thing about stealing things from ROI perspective. Your cost
Your
basis is zero.
Exactly.
Right, so
Well,
it's like-
you got to pay for the cops and
Oh,
the military,
that's true. Okay,
all that stuff.
that's true.
There's a cost to stealing things.
So back to Venezuela, we don't really know. Let's assume they have it. Well, we don't really know how they got it. Were they mining it? They might have been experimenting. They have a lot of cheap electricity. That's something that's pretty. Even if you don't like Bitcoin, it's very rational. You might not care about the network or Ethereum. It's like, hey, if I have all this cheap energy and I can have I lend some of that electricity or computing power to this network, I get paid.
Yep, exactly.
Right? A very rational decision, and this is something. It might surprise a lot of people out there, but this is something that's been talked about in like old Bitcoin. Threads or other
A lot of economic
cryptocurrency
threads.
community about like who would use this, and we're like, well,
what governments finally adopt it?
a rogue nation could find some
Venezuela
use.
is like the porn industry of the internet, right? They're kind of like the rogue industry, the rogue country, and they're the ones that adopt the new technology because they're the ones that are most in need of it.
Yeah, so that begs the question that for people that are new to it, and I think everyone in this industry has made peace with the fact that if you're going to make open, inclusive, neutral infrastructure, that inherently means there's going to be a lot of people that you don't like,
Using it.
and evil people or let's call them
How
evil.
you might
deem them evil, right?
Using
They're going to be using it. So
Well, look at it
I
from the
want to
perspective,
ask
yeah.
you, like, kind of your thinking on it, kind of like what you've accepted about the world and why, like, neutral,
I've-
open, inclusive systems are what are needed.
Yeah, I think I've always defined most, what would you call it, tangibles in our world, especially ones that were built without a specific intent, without a specific malicious, violent intent, as being neutral. And that they can be used for many different purposes, one of which was not so neutral. It could be evil, it could be violent, but the asset or the object itself inherently is neutral. So obviously that's why I'm in Bitcoin, that's why I'm in cryptocurrencies. Yes, you can use them for bad things, but my opinion isn't changed because of Venezuela necessarily acquiring it. And looking at it from their point of view and the angle of what becomes interesting to them. Now, once you've acquired and have now yourself, you're kind of on the other side of the fence where you now have this economic reason to increase the value of cryptocurrency because you hold a significant amount. We don't know the exact precise amount. We're going to assume it's something potentially significant, maybe in the hundreds of millions. And if you had that amount, and you are also restricted from the global digital economy, now you have almost two reasons to really drive the utility of Bitcoin forward. Number one, you don't really have a way of getting paid for your services of which happen to be one of the most valuable assets in the world in oil. And number two, once you get paid, that requires the payer to then acquire that asset, thereby increasing the value of the same asset you already hold. So it's one of these like 1-2 punches that the industry, I think, is going to be able to blow by simply having a country now being much more invested in Bitcoin. That to me is incredibly fascinating. There's almost like no reason why they long term shouldn't really embrace it.
Yeah, it seems the benefits seem obvious for countries in a certain context.
Yeah,
And it's really not that crazy, even though Bitcoin is still a very small market. If you look at the market for fiat currencies, sure, like the dollar, euro, yen are way up there in terms of like liquidity and access and stuff like that.
Yeah.
But once you start getting into that long tail,
Right.
actually Bitcoin becomes like, are you going to hold the New Zealand dollar if you're Venezuela?
Right.
No, Bitcoin is actually the rational choice. And at this point, maybe New Zealand has, I don't know what New Zealand's relationship with the U.S. would be. But I'd imagine a lot of countries, they kind of just go along with whatever,
They're like they
what
don't- they
daddy
don't-
says.
Yeah,
so
they
to
pretty
speak.
much they behave.
Right? And,
No, they pretty much just
and
behave.
part of what backs the dollar is like when we talk the U.S. Navy.
Yeah, the
if you want
military.
access to commercial shipping lanes, which is kind of like what I guess global capitalism is all about, like taking goods from one country to another, you better kind of go along with what the United States wants or deems appropriate. And Venezuela is on the out list.
Right.
And this is exactly.
They're already on the out list. One of the big ways to get on the out list is to trade oil in anything but the dollar. Once you do that, you're instantly on the out list.
And you're definitely a candidate for invasion.
Exactly, and they're already on the out list, so why shouldn't they be trading oil with Bitcoin? Entirely makes sense. So anyway, talked about this for quite a bit. I think it's totally fascinating. I think it's also fascinating that they're holding Bitcoin and Ether. It's interesting to me. I think that in and of itself probably implies that the Bitcoin and Ether were acquired through individuals in the country mining, because obviously a lot of them can mine Ether fairly easily using just general
Why
graphics cards.
does that imply that?
Because Ether, in and of itself, isn't usually considered something that, at the government level, a store of value, to the same degree that Bitcoin is. However, it is deemed an asset that is easier to mine than Bitcoin. And so you imagine there's probably a good pool of people in remote regions of the country that maybe don't have access to ASICs but can get regular graphics cards. Graphics cards are harder to ban than Bitcoin-specific ASIC mining chips. And so I'm guessing that at least the Ether, if not a good amount of the Bitcoin, is probably acquired from individuals within the country when it was seized. Anyways, moving on. So we said we were chat about Bakkt.
Oh, yeah, do a little bit about that.
A little
interesting.
A little interesting because it was launched, right? And so number one, let's recap. What is actually the big deal? Like, what was interesting about Bakkt that we hadn't done before?
I think for futures markets people that are into this stuff, it was a big step when the CME announced their market, but they weren't. People weren't completely satisfied because they were something known as cash settled contracts. So my understanding, it's almost like people characterize it as like a side bet. So, and you never actually take delivery of a commodity.
Actually, the commodity might not be anywhere inside of the entire marketplace of the bettor and the marketplace itself, and the person taking the opposite side of the bet. Nowhere there could the commodity might not be anywhere in there. It's just simply checking the price.
It's very divorced from the actual market, and you're just depending on, I guess, your faith in
the price information.
Price information coming from exchanges, right? And you kind of enter this market.
In a way, it's not that different. Not that I'm saying that this is a bad or good thing, but in a way, it's not that different from how we're able to create a synthetic asset such as DAI. Right? Basically, the price information, like there's no actual dollars anywhere in the system. It's price information getting fed and some other assets that are then used to back the liquidity. Right?
Yep.
But anyway, so getting back to Bakkt.
So this
is the first that does.
Bakkt does physically settle. So I think it's just a way of saying that you can actually take delivery of Bitcoin, which would be, all right, what is actual Bitcoin?
It's weird to say physical delivery, but like more like on-chain.
It sounds like more of it's not literally on-chain, but in the sense that like you actually have to source supply.
Right.
And I think what excites people or makes them happy is that there's some type of anchor to the actual units of Bitcoin, and you don't have as much room for manipulation.
Exactly.
Because I think it's a good heuristic where people, if like you remove things from the physical reality, you can do some cool stuff, right? You can manipulate things more, but also the manipulation implies
you don't know what you're getting.
Illusions, right? Yeah. Or you can increase supply arbitrarily. Where if you actually have to take physical delivery, it makes people more honest. So you might have a more honest market. And then I guess what else makes it significant? More diverse options, more on-ramps for users.
A different way of on-ramping.
And I shouldn't say users, just I'd say more attention and potential
more
money.
Visibility.
So this is definitely a number go up type phenomenon. People that are interested in the financialization of Bitcoin.
All news is good news and different financial.
And this is what Bloomberg, there'll always be stories about the futures market. And, Bloomberg and CNBC, if there's movements in there, they'll have a guy on there telling you why it'll be bullish because of X, Y, and Z on the futures market.
I do think it didn't make it as big of a splash as I think people were expecting, but in all honesty, I don't know that the target market cares as much about, like on-chain physical settlement as I think we were led to believe. And so that's why it didn't make us, it's like, so what? Okay, so that it launched. But we've already had futures. The CME has had futures on Bitcoin. They were cash settlement versus actual on-chain. I won't call it physical because there's no physical Bitcoin, but they weren't actually on-chain settlement. But that market doesn't actually care too much about that.
No, I mean, they want to make money.
They just want to make money, and if I could trade it just as fast on another platform that's well respected, and CME is definitely well respected, and I'm already using it, and I know the interfaces, then why would they then care about Bakkt? Now, I care about, obviously, on-chain, people actually owning assets, but these futures, during the course of the time that you're dealing with that future, you don't have custody of an asset. You just simply have a promise.
So
the
I
settlement
think
becomes only a...
From what I know about it, and someone can correct me if I'm wrong, that these are one-day contracts?
That I'm not entirely sure of. So
there was a little nugget that I saw. And if that's true, you get a more detailed picture of people's perspective on Bitcoin over time. So from a financial perspective, that could be something that people are excited about, where you get a lot of information, or you split up time into smaller and smaller chunks, and you can kind of see, all right, what does the market
really just tells you what
in a very more granular fashion, or you have a chance for that.
You do get that, although I think in the futures market, people want to see a lot of different time horizons. What's your 1 day futures contracts look like? What your 1 week, your 3 month, 1 year? That gives you a better picture on people's. Obviously, my 1 day intuition will be very different from my 1 year intuition of pretty much any asset, and so it's healthy to almost see the different potentials there.
I think the cool thing about a futures market, comparing it to a market without a futures market, you don't get to see what the market you're kind of staring into the abyss of what the market is perceiving the future price to be.
Yeah,
because here it's kind of like
spot market is right here, right now, and you're just looking at trends in the past and trying to predict future from there. Whereas futures market, they're almost, to some degree, almost self-fulfilling. You're seeing it's a prediction market.
Yes.
And you can look at a prediction market to almost help you predict what things are going to be, because many people are now financially invested in that exact outcome. And this is actually one of the pitches of Augur. When they were first building Augur, was they said, first we're building a prediction market so that people can hedge against things. First bet as they normally would, but then once you have enough of activity into various market events, you now have basically like a search engine for the future, and you could see what and you could kind of look at the track record. Okay, 3 months before the Super Bowl for the past 10 years, here's what people were predicting. Now can you use that to help predict the next one? Whether it be that, weather, it's crowdsourcing information of the future. And that's what prediction markets and futures kind of are. They're not 100% accurate.
It's kind of a way of building consensus about the future. And it's like, okay, because there's some people that don't necessarily have a view, and they'll just take on what the market is, and other people can trade on those inefficiencies of people not knowing and speculate, and you get rewarded if you're right, and you get wrecked if you're wrong. Right, that's part of the game. Okay, I think we
kind of covered a whole lot about
as much as we know about.
As much as we know. If you guys have any other insights, feel free to chime in. But interesting project in that sense. But in all honesty, not something that I'm super excited about. It's just like another custodial solution. Sure, they settle on chain, but 99% of the time the funds are being held by them. So that's something super exciting. Just wanted to cover the fact that they had launched, but not a big splash. Big news, however.
Yeah, let's go to some technical details of Bitcoin. That freaked a lot of newbies out.
Because it's like, and some of the oldies even freaked out a little bit.
Which I was surprised,
about the drop in hash power. It dropped a lot.
It did.
It dropped 40 to 50% in what appeared to be just minutes.
Yeah.
But had recovered in the day.
And as far as we know, we don't know exactly who that was or why. So it could have been one of those. In legal contracts you have force majeure or something like that. Or I don't even know if that's the phrase, but it's like an act of God. So it could have been some physical thing that happened in the universe that knocked some miner off, or maybe it was incompetency.
Venezuela electricity and power has gone off grid for days at a time in the past.
And if they're
secretly mining, then maybe that was it. Really hard to say. But what's interesting is, number one, it did come back up. All right, so looking at specific numbers, we're talking big numbers here that most of us don't even know how to pronounce. We had started before that crash in hash power at 104 quintillion hashes per second. This is just like, God, when have you ever said a number that big? So I think most people have heard of the number billion, trillion, and to some degree quadrillion. How many Satoshis are there in Bitcoin? 2.1
And the thing about these big numbers is I can't even, like I know we talked about it, but I can't even visualize it. You know, like what it's just so beyond.
10 with 18 zeros is a quintillion.
It just doesn't.
So 104. It was even bigger than a 1 quintillion. It was 104 quintillion hashes
per second.
Per second, dropped down to 57.
Can you get a definition for people watching what a hash is?
What a hash is one attempt at guessing the answer to a block.
So one guess.
One guess.
Quintillion, 110 quintillion.
110 quintillion.
It was at that level, or it was around that level.
On that level.
Dropped to like around 50, 60 level.
60.
And then
and about a day later back up. And I think today it's about 110. So above the level that it did when it dropped. And I think that drop was earlier this week.
And that was what people also don't know is that, yes, big drop, but it's actually big drops like that have happened before.
They've happened before.
Not a lot, but not enough where there's we know a little bit about the history and how the network reacts to it.
Right, exactly. So an interesting thing that I think most people don't understand about hash power that I wanted to go into a little bit of detail about is, and if I just say this by itself, people are like, no, wait, Paul, you're wrong. But hear me out.
Hear me out.
Hash power does not equal security. Simple as that. Whoa, what? Are you serious? Because most people think, wait a minute, I need more hash rate and to secure the network.
It's not a one-to-one.
It's not a one-to-one. Like, you know,
it's
if you
part
double
of
the hash rate, it's part of the equation. Okay. Really, what equals security is the amount of money that goes into creating the hash power. So if you have 1 hash per second, but that hash costs trillions and trillions of dollars to create, then you potentially have the same amount of security as if you had trillions of hashes per second that each cost $1 to make. So that's the thing people forget about. It's a ratio, as I think you would say. It's a ratio of the hash power and then the cost per hash. So interestingly enough, different cryptocurrencies have different hashing algorithms. And different hashing algorithms can operate on different kinds of hardware. And different kinds of hardware have different levels of cost. So the hardware costs a lot themselves, so that adds to the cost of the hashes per second, but because they cost a lot, they generate a ton of hashes per second. Specifically, I'm talking about the ASICs. So ASICs as a whole take the cost to create a hash, and they actually shift it from electricity to the cost of the ASIC. Whereas a GPU, which is relatively inefficient, makes it where most of the cost of a hash, of a single hash, is actually mostly electricity, and far less the hardware involved.
Okay. All right, so there's some nuance here. If you have a more GPU-powered network, the security is definitely more dependent on energy costs.
On energy costs.
And if you have an ASIC-based network, it's I guess the important variable would be ASIC costs.
Exactly.
Going into the future.
So one thing that you might see at times in the network is a sudden huge bump up in hashing power. And this happens when new hardware comes out and gets mass adopted by a lot of the miners. And that new hardware is incredibly more efficient. But that does not mean that the network is actually more secure. Because that new hardware, by making hashing more efficient, has reduced the cost to the miners on terms of energy and electricity. Now, if the hardware itself is significantly more expensive, then the cost overall goes up. But these potential large bump ups in hashing power might actually be not so much large bump ups in security, but just moderate bump ups in security because yes, the equipment costs a little bit more, but these miners aren't suddenly incurring a huge increase in cost. Otherwise, they would just go out of business. So they're accommodating a larger, more gradual increase in cost that does increase the hashing power. In the same sense, in theory, and I'm not saying this is what happened with the drop in hash power, but in theory, we could see a sudden drop in hash power, but have no reduction in security if the cause was a sudden huge increase in the cost of electricity. What if the global electricity cost, for some reason, a bunch of power plants suddenly shut off and said, sorry, we can't supply, and suddenly the price of electricity goes up, and all of the miners, some miners effectively shut down because they can't afford it. Well, the miners that are still existing are paying a larger amount of money to electricity, and therefore providing potentially equivalent security. So it's really the two that matter the most. Most people really forget about that detail.
Yeah, and the fundamental assumption is that the honest nodes, or in terms of like fundamental Bitcoin security, would be able to economically outlast any attacker.
Yes.
Right, it's not necessarily
Yeah, they would if they were the majority of the
I'm saying
network.
it comes down to economic costs.
Correct. And if the honest nodes are a larger economic cost, not necessarily
Yes.
actually a larger economic cost of the entire network, then they are the ones that would determine the state of the network and determine the rule sets and validate transactions. But that's the interesting thing about the hash power. We don't know exactly why it had dropped. What was the impact? Fairly minor.
Well, and
Other than media, it was a fairly minor thing to the network as a whole. And these things, as you said,
and
happen.
to me, it's like a reminder of how these networks are set up so that when a bunch of nodes, critical nodes goes down, it can still operate.
It can still operate. Now, whether or not you're as secure is another question. Right?
Yeah.
This is a concern about security of the network. If say electricity costs are the same, ASIC costs are the same, and a bunch of nodes drop off, a bunch of mining nodes drop off the network, and hash power drops, yes, your security has dropped by that percentage. No question about it. My only insight into this is that you can't look purely at the hash rate. But yes, you do need to.
Well, I brought up the point of it could still operate even when large, important economic and security nodes drop off, compared to, let's say, our other fiat system, where if some critical nodes drop off like that, or
you
they
disconnect
can't
a lot
provide
of people.
liquidity, there's like a cascading effect where it can't move forward. Where these networks are set up explicitly for those types of situations.
It's the redundancy of the network in that every node and every miner holds the entire chain, and the contribution of one miner has nothing to do with a specific region or group of people. So it doesn't. You could literally have one miner in the entire network, and you would function so long as that miner was honest. And so that is the significant difference, but also that comes at the cost of this kind of decentralized network and redundancy, because redundancy does have a cost. Moving on. So one of the most common questions we've had over the past few weeks, this comes straight from our support team, are limits in edge transactions. We've added a lot of new buy, sell, swap partners within the app, and people have asked, well, what are the limits? And they definitely do vary depending on what you're trying to do. If all you're doing is sending and receiving crypto, there are no limits. You're talking directly to the blockchain networks. You can hold, send, and receive as much as you financially can afford to. But when it comes to purchasing, selling, and trading, there are some limits imparted by some of our partners, because you do go through some of the third parties. And I'll just kind of mention some notable limits of some of our top partners that offer exchange services. Within the swaps specifically, this is you're going crypto to crypto. We have some partners that typically have $5,000, $10,000 limits, but a few that actually claim to have no limits at all. Trade as much as you want, $100,000, $200,000, they can do it, but of course that comes at a trade-off. That trade-off could be how much time it takes for them to settle that trade, that crypto to crypto swap. Could take a while because they have to source liquidity from multiple different exchanges, and you might actually move the market. Therefore, the spread that you'll get ends up being much larger, and you'll feel like you're getting a higher fee, like a worse exchange rate on that swap. But in theory, most of the liquid pairs, if you just say an edge, I want to swap this amount, it's going to find you the best rate with a partner that can do it at that size. So practically no limits. When going from a bank account or a credit card or fiat, some common limits that off the top of my head, we do have, using Wire, which uses a bank account in the US, there's a $2,500 per week limit. So you can buy Bitcoin and Ether at $2,500 per week, $10,000 per month. However, they have an unlimited sell. So you can pretty much sell as much as you'd like into a bank account. We did see, a big bump up in transaction volume once we enabled that, which just came on about a couple weeks ago. Cool. If you want to buy from a credit card.
Who is that with?
This is with Wire, W-Y-R-E.
Unlimited sell?
Unlimited sell.
But limited buy.
Limited buy.
That's convenient.
It's convenient. Well, it's convenient.
I'm saying
it makes
for
sense.
for fiat.
To understand why that is because, when you sell crypto, you're sending Bitcoin to an exchange, and they can trust that they receive it in 10 minutes. Right? They have no fraud risk. But when they buy from a bank account, there's a chance that transaction gets reversed. And so they're like, well, let's put a limit on that and make sure that at most, you can only fraud $2,500 a week from us. But we're hoping those limits go up, the buy limits go up over time. With our partner Wire, which does credit card transactions, you actually have a $20,000 per transaction limit.
No, you mean Simplex?
I'm sorry, Simplex. Simplex, which supports credit cards pretty much globally, we have a $20,000 per transaction limit, and I'm going to say $50,000 per month. I could be a little off there by a little bit, but around $50,000 per month limit, which is actually relatively high for, especially for credit cards. And then we've also got a few other partners, not Wire, but MoonPay, which lets you use Apple Pay in Canada, in
South Africa.
South Africa, Japan.
Is it live right now?
South Africa is. Japan is live as well.
Okay.
As well as one other place. I
Well,
forgot where I said
Europe.
it.
Well, it's
Yeah,
going to be all of Europe. All of Europe,
all
Canada, South Africa, and now Japanese yen.
South Korea. That's one.
South Korea. Okay, the won.
Yeah, and their limit is $2,000 per transaction. So those are a handful of limits of some of the most popular exchanges. We're going to have a few more coming on live. Definitely tune in next week. We've got a major announcement coming up next week with a new integration, new exchange partner that will just blow your socks off. This is going to be awesome. Like, we're going to make friction go to zero for when you want to buy a good chunk of crypto from your bank account.
Oh.
But those are the limits that we've got.
We do have some questions.
We got some questions. We've got time. We're a little over. We got time to answer a few questions. Who we got?
So we got Jet Black GT. I like that. How do you go about advising people of the relationship between hash power and number of confirmations?
Yeah. So really, the question is, how much money does it take to reverse a transaction? And that is how many confirmations you want to wait. Each confirmation is putting a certain amount of money into a confirmation. Now, if that money is less than the amount that you are transacting, you're going to want to wait more than one confirmation. Fortunately, each additional confirmation is actually exponentially more difficult to unwind. Those exact numbers I don't have, and I probably can't answer in the course of this Q&A, but I just make it a point to maybe answer that at the next Q&A. But really, that's the question, is not the number of hashes per second, it's what is the cost per confirmation on whatever chain you happen to be on. And that will be lower on chains that have just simply lower amounts of hash rate and money going into it, such as a Dash compared to a Bitcoin, or an Ethereum versus an Ethereum Classic. That's the main thing to compare about, which is why some chains, when you deposit to an exchange, require like hundreds of confirmations. It's simply that.
You were talking about the economic cost before. It seems like each block security changes with the price of the price of energy in the future. So its relative security changes in the future.
It does. However, the interesting thing is it trends towards being equal to the price of the currency. It trends towards that. The currency price almost definitively in the long term defines the amount of security in the network, specifically with proof of work chains.
Yep.
So that's one specific trend. So just because I wanted to wrap up here, we got one question that was about the Young Dumb Crypto. Thanks so much for liking the live stream. Thanks for tuning in.
What major bank chain, I think you mean like what major bank is most crypto friendly from your experience? Major? Who's
Major? He's probably talking like Wells Fargo, Chase. Chase definitely not.
I would. Chain.
Wells Fargo, Bank of America, not so much.
Well, I feel like J.P. Morgan's. You take their rhetoric and their actions, and they're separate.
They are separate, but they definitely have closed down bank accounts from people that have traded crypto through their bank.
Oh, that's true.
So,
well, I know Goldman Sachs isn't a chain, but they have been friendly in terms of being open to it, and also they bought Circle, right?
They invested
is that true? Or
they invested in Circle.
Or I'm sorry, yeah, bought is a loaded term. Invested in Circle, who bought Poloniex. I know Circle bought Poloniex.
Yeah, I'll say one thing. They're maybe not a major chain, but I would say that if you don't already know about, definitely give some props up to Silvergate, which is not a major chain bank, but they're very supportive, not so much to the individual level, but to cryptocurrency businesses. I mean, they are the anchor of banking for a lot of exchanges and other services in the crypto space and businesses that do need banking relationships.
Based here in San Diego.
They're based right here in San Diego. Yep, exactly.
Silverbank.
Cool. Last question we could probably handle here is
support for Link or ADA. Well, we already have Link.
Link is already in the app. It's an ERC20
ERC20
token, and even if we didn't support it, you could add it manually yourself inside of Edge. But ADA is still being thought about. It has some challenges due to the language that the library is written into, and we do get quite a bit of requests for it. And so I'm excited to get it in. I do want to get it in, but it's not quite there yet at this point. Thanks for asking, though, helping nudge us in that direction. All right, let's wrap up. We're about 5 minutes over. I want to cover really quickly just our events, where you can come check us out and meet the team, primarily me for some of the travel and to some degree some other folks. This coming weekend, Avant Pay in Washington, D.C. It's talking about cannabis with a lot of crypto focus on it. I'll be speaking at a panel there. Right after that, the Amsterdam Bitcoin Wednesday. They've been doing this every first Wednesday of the month in Amsterdam since I think 2013. Hats off to Richard Cole. Super consistent, really, really consistent. I'll be speaking at that on a Wednesday, October 2nd. And then after that, I will be in Berlin October 8th. I'm speaking at a meetup over there, the Unchained meetup, which also has an Unchained conference, which just passed over the summertime. And then I'll be at the Bob meetup, Bitcoin and Open Blockchain meetup in Chicago on the 12th of October. And then you can catch a good chunk of our team over at World CryptoCon in Vegas, baby. But that is, actually, no, one more. We will also be at LibitConf. So we're, at least myself, we might send a few more folks on our team being at LibitConf in Uruguay, South America, in December later this year. So hope to see you guys there. Say hi if you're at any of these events, and we'll catch you next week. Cool? Not your keys?
Not your crypto.